Right, greetings and salutations, people of IBC. Welcome to Mad Men in the Digital Age, the panel which promises to get you to the bottom of the latest and greatest developments in TV advertising. We have an extraordinary panel of big players sitting here today, representing pretty much every part of the sell side of the market. Tech players, Liberty, it's a great panel. The format is going to be very straightforward. Our panel is going to come up one at a time, and we've given them a very simple brief, which is to tell us exactly what's happening in TV and video advertising, the single most exciting thing that they think will change the TV advertising market together. So you're going to hear from 5 real gurus, 4 minutes of sharp, concentrated insight. We're then going to sit down, we'll chat, we'll take some questions at the end, and then go straight into the blockchain session. So it should be a fantastic hour and a half of insight, expertise, wit, humor, and so on and so forth. So, without further ado, we're going to go straight to our first panelist. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Alan Klosowski from SpotX.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. So I think one of the things that we are really thinking about when we think about the future of advertising in television is, kind of really led by this idea of convergence and the idea that the audience is now starting to consume across multiple platforms, multiple devices, and multiple delivery methods. So that means that the path to video, broadcast-level video content, and therefore the advertising that is delivered as such, has really gone from being, very simple to now it's audience markets that are driven across multiple touch points, all the way from set-top box, digital ad insertion, server-side ad insertion, multimedia devices. We're seeing the OTT paid bundles, skinny bundles, which I think is a misnomer because at this point you can spend nearly, in the US, $100 on them as a pay TV package. And then you're also looking at, kind of a shift of this live linear content moving across every different consumption point, which really has some impacts, I think, to how we think about how we address these audiences. Because now we're looking to say we have audiences across all of these different devices. The devices themselves are starting to become discoverable in all of the different pools. So device discoverability of audiences is a really big deal. The idea that you can then start thinking about that, whether the device is addressable or just discoverable, you can start doing decisioning around which advertisement gets to which market, and you can start bringing things like data into the transaction. This is creating a lot of friction, of course. There's the idea from the digital side of impressions. There's rating points. There's buying spots. There's, in certain regions, you have friction between spot markets and locals and nationals. You have different rules and rules of engagement, country by country basis, particularly here in Europe. And this is causing some friction on the buy side because there's an idea of what is the currency moving forward. There's an idea of programmatic. What does that mean? Is it this idea of an auction, or is it using access to the inventory for the actual buyers? And what are they doing with it? Why do they want to do that? The audience targeting that goes in it. What does that mean for audience targeting? What does it mean for content, and what does it mean for context? Are you buying context, or are you buying audiences, or are you buying both? I tend to think it's both. So there's, on our side, the idea that really, if you were looking at it, previously you would have a spot that would be sold with a unit rate, and a pod of 5 ads could be, let's just say for grins, 50,000 euro. But you're essentially looking at different audience segments for different ads in each slot, and you're kind of targeting against that. If you break that out in a traditional linear environment, and you start looking at what audiences are reached at what price points, it actually has an equivalent value. You can run this analysis a lot of ways. You can use whatever currencies you want. But the idea is essentially once you go into the idea that everything becomes an audience market and you can start breaking up this content accordingly, you can start looking at how to increase the overall value using whatever numbers you want to run in this scenario. But I think it's generally agreed that the best possible outcome for somebody who's a media owner or broadcaster, et cetera, would be the idea that they can raise their yields at the same time delivering a higher ROI from advertisers, however that's going to shake out. But we have to solve for all of those different environments. So what I'll say the future of TV really ends up going to versus the audience markets and content markets and the combination of each is that we're seeing a couple things. A shift to IP delivery and things like ATSC 3.0, are rapidly growing the addressable market. And then there's other technology innovators that are coming in that are starting to actually disrupt or augment traditional delivery methods. Device discoverability is really moving to deliver fractionalized audiences, but it's doing it at scale. Okay, so the idea that we can finally assemble addressable audiences at scale with data behind it, and I think there's some incredible people coming to speak behind me about data sets, about technology enhancement. This is where things are going. The discoverability, whether it's addressable or not, allows targeting, advertising, and messaging in a way that at scale that was just previously not something that I think we had in the past, and it's going to rapidly evolve. So the future of TV and TV advertising is very much tied to this addressability, this data, and the ability to tie this all together so it's as seamless for users as it is, or seamless for advertisers as it is for users to move across devices and engage with content that's relevant to them. Thank you.
Alan? Alan, this way.
Yep.
You come over here. We're not done with you yet. Right, grab a seat. Let's get our next panelist up. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ashwin Navin, co-founder and CEO of Samba TV.
Thank you very much. Samba cares deeply about television audiences. What we're trying to do is make them more addressable and more measurable. What we've seen is that the television industry has been able to rely on two things for decades: scarcity and scalability. The scalability of the TV audience is substantial. It represents the largest and most substantial medium. It's the way that people primarily are informed and entertained around the world. And the publishers of media have been able to rely on that scale and the scarcity of inventory inside those platforms to drive the business for decades today. But there's this amazing phenomenon that we've seen over in digital media and now in television as well, that we face a problem with fragmentation. You know, the consumer today has unlimited choice. There's no longer scarcity in the number of choices that we have, and unlimited control in the way that we are able to access and enjoy video. And in that sort of evolution, traditional publishers are forced to make a very difficult decision, which is that we must embrace new forms of addressability of the audience. What Samba is trying to do is introduce a platform to help create a platform for addressability and measurability of the TV audience. We know that today consumers are no longer watching television on a television. We're watching it on many different screens. And we're no longer watching television simply from broadcasters alone. We have many providers of video today that are all competing for our time and attention and our focus. So what advertisers are presented with is no longer a limited number of ways to present your brand, but a great variety of publishers who are willing to price media in ways that we haven't seen historically. As Jeremy mentioned, unit-based pricing is what we've been able to rely on in the television business for many decades. But you've got meaningful amounts of scale and inventory available from Facebook and Google that are priced on a CPM basis, that provide very narrow audiences, and are even priced in certain cases on a performance basis. And that's providing the advertiser a far more accountable form of media than they've had available in the past. So we believe that the market's going to need tools that allow data to more effectively select media vendors. We've believe that when you use data and more narrow audience segmentation, that the vendors you choose for media may look completely different than if you use the traditional measurement approach, which is to segment audiences based on age and gender. We think that that is going away, and that data will inform what formats, what platforms, and what media providers make the most sense for your brand. And no longer will you be reaching the television alone. Addressability is going to be a cross-screen phenomenon that allows an advertiser to reach the audience that cares most about a luxury automobile, like the Audi sedan. And you're not going to be reaching that audience entirely on a television, but you're going to be using all the screens that people might be engaged with while they're watching television for periods of time afterwards. This level of addressability, we think, while it might be scary today, provides brands the most effective way to drive desire for products and ultimately sales. And the sooner that we as publishers of media can come to grips with that and embrace that, the more that we can, as a traditional media business, compete with all of the new forms of addressability that come from the major social and search platforms. Lastly, we think it's super fascinating that television can become more accountable. Attribution is not something that people usually get from television. We buy against very broad segments like age and gender, but the value in driving engagement and ultimate sales is not something that you can normally describe television with, but we think that's going to change. We're very excited about using technology and data to make TV audiences not only more addressable, but more measurable. How can a TV commercial perform relative to a Facebook ad or to a Google ad? And how do you use both of them to their best and highest use? How do we achieve that? With better data. We've got to basically understand what's on the screen and how many ads or what ads you've been exposed to in very precise terms. We've got to understand what devices you have at your disposal, and we've got to marry the behaviors of TV and digital together to both create better audience segmentation as well as create accountability and attribution. It's a fascinating world when the TV audience is measured in real time. This is something that Samba cares deeply about because we think that the timeliness of the data and the addressability allows TV to perform to a much higher degree and compete again more effectively with digital competitive opportunities. So I'm going to stop here and then look forward to the panel discussion for more of this. Thanks.
Thank you, Ashwin. Right, this is a three-John panel, so I'm going to welcome the second of our Johns up onto the stage. This is John Block, VP of Product and Platform for Videology in EMEA. Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. I'm going to talk about progressive TV advertising, which is another buzzword, I guess, progressive TV advertising. I think we have actually John Watts to thank for this buzzword because it was our research project together that I think coined this term. And I think progressive TV advertising, actually, it covers a lot of what both Alan and Ashwin were talking about. I like to call it the 4 A's. You can see I've cheated a bit there by putting an A in front of cross-media targeting. But Ashwin was talking about cross-media targeting and advanced analytics. Alan was talking about addressability. And then I think another very important aspect about the way TV is evolving is around automation and making trading, automation, and the buying and selling of advertising much more effective. Just in these few moments now, I'm just going to briefly look at 2 of these points, addressability and automation. And on addressability, rather than, I think, focusing on the microscopic detail, I want to focus on the macroscopic. And this diagram actually comes out of the research that actually John Watts and my company Videology did together, looking at addressability in the European market and looking at which territories and which broadcasters are most advanced in this area. And what came out of the research is that we identified 3 kind of key areas that were helping the market evolve. Firstly, there were the enablers, which are almost the hurdles that the market has to overcome to get to the point where addressable TV advertising can grow. And those enablers are technical infrastructure. So are the correct boxes in place, maybe the satellites or the set-top boxes or the cables into the home that can allow dynamic ad insertion? Is the right commercial structure in place? Are the agencies willing to embrace this? Are the operators willing to work with the broadcasters to make this happen? And then last but not least, of course, regulation. That's a very important hurdle as well. Is the right legal framework in place? Is there a national law that prevents dynamic ad insertion into broadcast streams like there is in France at the moment? So those are the 3 enablers to overcome. Then there are the drivers that are actually driving the agencies and broadcasters to adopt this. And they come in the form of the commercial opportunity. Is there more money available? Are advertisers willing to spend more money for targeted adverts? Is there demand from the advertiser and agency? Are they actually driving the adoption of this? And then finally, competition. And I'll come on to this a bit more in the future. You know, is there competition from other broadcasters, or is there competition from other parties outside of the broadcast industry? And then the final kind of area that really helps the addressable TV market grow is around measurement. Is there a unified form of measurement that enables cross-screen planning and cross-screen selling? So those are the key ingredients for addressable advertising. There's, if you contact me afterwards, I'll be happy to give you a link to where you can download this whole 30-page report. It's absolutely excellent. And we have John Watts to thank for that slightly. Of course, slightly. The last point I just wanted to make was on automation as well. And this is actually, I think I wanted to highlight a threat here as well. And that is when you think about digital video advertising and TV advertising, it's all about getting brands in front of content. And there are loads of people in the value chain between those brands and that content. There's advertisers, agencies, there's trading desks, DSPs, SSPs. There's loads I haven't put here, the DMPs and ad networks. And really, this whole value chain has evolved over time. It's probably not as efficient as it could be. And I mean, that's one reason where, I mean, Videology, we kind of position ourselves as trying to be a platform that works with both the supply and the demand side, connecting the supply and the demand side together in this new addressable world. But really, the threat I wanted to highlight is the threat of the digital pure players. Because I really believe when you look at companies like Google, Amazon, and Netflix, they are actually really wanting to span or capture the entire value chain. And I think there's a macroscopic threat to the entire industry from the digital pure plays. And that's an industry that has a very equitable and historic relationship between broadcasters and agencies. And I think this threat is really going to drive very fast evolution and adoption of progressive TV advertising technologies in the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Let's welcome our third John to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome John Paul, who's Managing Director of Advanced Advertising and Data at Liberty Global.
Thanks so much. So just briefly, Liberty Global, for those who don't know, we're the largest TV and broadband operator in the world. 12 countries in Europe, 20 countries, which is kind of cheating because those include a lot of Caribbean island nations. But we operate 20 billion revenue, around 29 million customers. And what I've done here is identified in black where we're launching addressable advertising. So we are a believer in this model, and thankfully I don't have to explain what it is because the previous presenters did that very well. But we view ourselves as an enabler of this. And we do not own the inventory like they do in the United States. So in Europe, we are rolling this out based on set-top box capability. Liberty Ad Plus is an internal brand because we have many operations and operators. We use different brands to articulate the capabilities that we have. We've really noticed in doing this, we're not ad guys. We come from really M&A and burying cable in the ground. And so over the decades, we have innovated against that infrastructure. And this, to us, is a very important innovation. And it's a very important way of sort of rising tide lifting all boats, bringing new capability to broadcasters. Not going to end all wars, but it's a really good augmentation of a television broadcast capability. But we really noticed three things out of this. First is data's key, right? This is how we create the segment. This is how we measure the attribution on the other end. But it's not everything. Yield becomes very, very important. And we could spend a day talking about what that means. But basically, if you're a farmer, this is a new crop. And we've got to figure out how we holistically manage that yield to a net benefit. And that includes, if I'm a broadcaster, that also includes where I'm putting my content in the digital world. But today it's bifurcated. We trade differently on television than we do in digital. And thirdly, and this is where I think we are not there yet, is, well, we've described it as heart, but it's really, what are we really doing to use these amazing new tools to engage the customer. Are we really changing the advertising? Are we changing the formats? Or are we still getting beaten to death with too large of an ad load on linear television? If you're in the UK, you'll notice challenges with reach mean they try to do more frequency, and you get beat up with that. And so the things that we're trying to work with broadcasters, and they're all across the spectrum, is we've really got to look at formats. Because if you look at the VOD world, and you talk to a broadcaster that says, well, I'm going to take my linear ad load, and I'm going to put it exact same thing into a VOD product, guess what's going to happen? No one's going to watch the VOD product at all. So this, to me, these are all very important, and these are things that we're investing in and that we're doing. But to close the loop, the agencies and the creative have to do this. And so in answer to John's questions, and this is an extreme view, but in answer to John's question, I don't think the most important thing in advertising has actually happened yet. Because now we have the tools, now we have the capabilities, what are we going to do with it? And how do we get to a position where more is less? How do we use this so that we make television advertising really a better medium for the consumer? And that's really our focus. I have a video, but I think we'll skip it.
John, thank you very much. That's great. Let's jump on into our... is that it?
No, that's it. Should I...
I can do that.
Okay.
I think I can do that. Thank you. And finally, Les. Les Carter, everybody, Vice President and Chief Architect of Cadent Technology. Please.
Don't thank me. Thanks to savings.
There we go.
Thanks, John. So yeah, I'm with Cadent Technology, who for over the last decade have been providing advertising monetization technology for pay TV providers. And today I wanted to spend a few moments just discussing where we see the state of the art in terms of TV advertising, and then also some thoughts about where we see the future of TV advertising going. So, since 1941 with that first TV ad with Malova for the watch, for many decades afterwards, spray and pray type advertising where there was no insight about the overall audience was the dominant form of TV advertising. And it wasn't until much, much later in the 80s and 90s we start to see the advent of data-driven TV, starting off with audience indexing, being able to understand the composition of the footprint, where how to skew particular audiences in particular geographies. And then in the 90s, we start to see time-shifted TV, and that's really with the advent of video on demand and network DVR. And for the very first time, we start to see one-to-one household addressability with data applied to it. The start of this century, we start to see OTT devices. And shortly after, we start to see addressable linear, which is the application of data-driven TV onto live TV. Not all MVPDs, though, are in a position where they can actually take an addressable linear solution. And so the next kind of state-of-the-art solutions are around extracting additional value out of existing infrastructure through next-gen insertion. And it's these two things that I want to focus on for a couple of minutes. So addressable linear, it's been out there for a little while, but the current incarnations of addressable linear were limited through the application of the technology. So they were typically resource constraint, meaning they didn't have backhaul for real-time ad decisioning. They were limited to DVR local storage. They were having to use panel-based extrapolations for measurements, and it wasn't as accurate as the current state of the art, which is leveraging network-based decisioning. And what that allows you to do is get true holistic cross-platform campaign management. So now I can start to manage campaigns across VOD, network DVR, OTT, and live linear all in the same campaigns. And for the first time, we can start to get real-time census-based measurements, so you can really get an impact on your campaigns in real time. But like I said, not a lot of MVPDs are actually in a state right now where they can actually accept this type of technology. And so what we're enabling is the extraction of additional value of MVPD's current infrastructures through next-gen insertion. And so what that really means is being able to take advantage of things like regional ad insertion and apply real-time audience indexing. This allows us to do ad insertion, understanding the audience composition in real time, and apply that to impression-based campaign management. And this is all back in the network, so it allows you to do data-driven TV without heavy lifting on set-top boxes. So where do we see the future of TV advertising going? Well, as some of the panels already pointed out, it's definitely going to become more measurable. And that's not just on the addressable portion, that's going to be on the existing traditional linear ad loads as well. Those are going to become more measurable and attributable. It's going to become more interactive. So, for example, we start to see the prevalence of ATSC3 in South Korea and then soon to be in the US. In Europe and elsewhere, we're starting to see HBB TV 2.0. And TV is definitely going to become more interactive over the long period. And we're going to see it more social. So right now, we're starting to see websites such as Rabbit. We're seeing Facebook with their Oculus offerings. We're seeing other MVPDs starting to provide social offerings. And TV viewing is not going to be constrained anymore to just you sat on your sofa. It's going to be engaging you with other people, your friends, your family, and other people who share the same passions. Thank you very much.
Les, thank you. Right. We have a few questions we're going to talk through, and we'll try and leave some time for a couple of quick questions at the end. So I want to start with you, Anne, if that was all right, just to get this one out the way. It's very hard to pick up any newspaper or advertising rag without seeing this notion that TV is under massive threat, that Google, Facebook, FANG are somehow out to decimate TV budgets. But that doesn't seem to correspond with reality in lots of markets, where TV advertising seems pretty robust. Broadcasts have adapted well. The market's at a high or near an all-time high. There's some structural, there's some cyclical issues, rather, but not much evidence yet of massive structural shifts. How would you characterize the threat today? What's the actual reality of the threat for TV budgets in the TV ad market?
Yeah, I would say it would be very market dependent, because as you start to look at these structural shifts in the United States, they've accelerated pretty quickly in ways I think that will start to accelerate also in Europe as people start to move to OTT content consumption, et cetera. The issue I think right now that hasn't come full circle is that the agencies and buyers themselves are confused by all of the options and where all of the audiences move. So they don't, at this point right now, they are, I think, unable to buy devices just across screens, or audiences across screens and across distribution methods using consistent data and measurability at scale. And as an industry, we have to solve that problem. We have to come to the table with something that works not just in the UK, and it also works in France, and it also is, as an application in the United States. That's something that if we don't do, then the threat to the TV advertising industry is real, because as John, one of the Johns, middle John, over here. So as John has pointed out, the technology giants are making scale and data very, very easy for agencies.
Ashwin, if the problem is measurement, then that doesn't feel like a problem that's going to be solved anytime soon. It's a problem that's getting worse, in a sense.
Well, I don't know. We can't keep playing the game of increasing CPMs in the face of declining scale, declining reach. But I think that's a short-term maneuver while measurement and audiences come to fruition, while we're basically building out those platforms as middle John, actually, yeah, third John, last John,
right.
Already articulated. We're as the platforms develop yield management systems, and the buyers develop and deploy audience-based targeting mechanisms. That's basically the short-term phenomenon. But those are the two critical pieces that we need. And I don't see that being a very distant reality. We see, major publishers across the world, in the U.S., NBC, Turner, committing meaningful amounts of their inventory to audience-based buying. Not 10 years from now, but this year going through 2020 is when they expect to have a mature and meaningful amount of their inventory transacted against audiences.
So your argument would be generally that where linear TV is clearly declining in most markets as consumers gain access to other products and services, VOD, OTT, and so on, but broadcasters are generally responding well to adapt to that change. and are monetizing it effectively?
I think what you see is there's a trend that broadcasters are vertically integrating with platforms because they need the data to be able to transform and move their business model forward. If they don't own a platform or part of a platform, they're aligning with companies that have data so that they can evolve their sale.
Can I get back to the threat point moment? Because I think we haven't bashed FANG enough, actually. FANG being Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and
Please.
Google. I think we're about to get to an inflection point of the risk that's posed by Google, Facebook, and Netflix. And that inflection point hasn't come yet because Google and Facebook do not have the content, and Netflix do not have the advertising. But that is changing. Look at Facebook. In the last few months, they bid $600 million for the Indian Premier League cricket rights. Yes, they were outbid by Star by $2 billion, but they're making moves. That's $600 million. That's a big investment. And then you look at Netflix. Like, their growth has been astronomical, but it's leveled off because they've penetrated the market. And really, if you think about it, the only way that they can continue to derive value for the shareholders is to consider some form of freemium model and introduce advertising. And as soon as you've got Google or Facebook with TV-like content, with all the benefits of TV-like advertising, as opposed to the crappy adverts they have at the moment, and as soon as you have Netflix, which has TV-like content but no adverts, that's going to cause a massive disruption to the market.
I think there's a third thing you'd add, which is increasingly these services are going to be on your TVs.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The user experience, yeah.
I think one of the flags that you got to watch out is, in the US for the first time this year, mobile and digital combined eclipsed TV ad spend, right? And so while TV is robust, there are definitely dollars falling into those
Sure.
competition.
But is it the same budgets or is it different budgets, I guess? Because obviously print's had a pretty torrid time, radio's had a pretty tough time.
It's no coincidence that Facebook partners with Nielsen to be able to describe digital advertising on Facebook in TV terms. They're all about taking the TV budget.
Sure.
Every business plan in Silicon Valley is about how do I take TV budget. They're now effectively competing for someone.
But I think the budget is tied to the user experience of long-form advertising, in that there is no better form of advertising on this planet than watching a 30, 60-minute program where you're in some sort of emotional state, you're relaxed, and it cuts to an ad break, and you get to see a beautifully created, 30-second or maybe 10-second creative telling you a story. And that's why the TV budgets have remained with TV for now.
But as a user, that's a great experience. As an advertiser, the question is going to come into, once you have somebody like Amazon enter the market that has full path attribution, and you start thinking about, to John Paul's question about yield, the advertiser is thinking about yield on their side too. So if they're thinking about yield on their side, they're thinking about how do I measure my spend in a way that ties full circle. So some of the new methodologies do that. So maybe the experience of a mobile ad may not be as good, but maybe the attribution path is better. And so in the wash, it's not a meaningful comparison. What we need on the I think is kind of a merging of the two mindsets between television and digital, so that they're not siloed out. That we start thinking about attribution and ROI from the advertiser's perspective in a really measurable way that moves beyond panel-based data and other things. So I think that's the challenge, because if you don't do that, it's back to the innovator's dilemma. What looks like an inferior product can become the
I think the point we could probably all agree with, though, is that we are absolutely reaching a state where the threat is intensifying, and it's going to continue intensifying over the next few years. Broadcasters have to respond. So let's... Oh, that was not as seamless as I was hoping for. Let's step back a second. So we heard a lot about the different elements of the advanced advertising stack. I guess rather than do the obvious thing and start with Big John, I thought we might go with John Paul. John Paul, how do you see the state of advanced advertising across Europe today from a Liberty Global point of view? It's very uneven as a picture, would be my starting point.
Well, look, I mean, in Europe, it's just beginning. If we're talking about Addressable, we've launched in Belgium. We have it in the UK, and that's kind of it. I mean, there's Sky's doing a bit in Italy, and I think Sky, is doing a fantastic job with what they have in the UK, and we're partnering with them to do that. But it's really right at the beginning, and unfortunately, we don't have. There is this threat, And Liberty Global, we're passionate about the home and the customer. And so generally, not so much advertising, but generally we look at all these things and we say, we are never going to be able to keep up with the level of innovation, but we can curate it and package it so that customers have access to all the things that they need to have access to. But some of the broadcasters here in Europe, the penny has not dropped on how they should use this, and it's not cannibalizing, or if it is, it's okay to have some element of cannibalization.
I guess at this point, someone has to mention the vertical integration point. Sky has a sales house, it has channels, it has a platform, which has been a huge help. Les, in the States, that kind of vertical integration point is being addressed both by M&A, but also by commercial agreements. Yeah. What's made advanced advertising a bit more advanced in the US than in bits of Europe, where, as JP said, we're at the starting point?
I'd argue that it's, it is more advanced, and in some cases it isn't. So in some instances, they've got scale, right? So you've had Comcast over there, now Charter, being able to achieve scale by deploying addressable platforms. But Europe is taking a lot more proactive view in increasing the number of platforms and really making that cross-platform play a reality. So the introduction of OTT, the introduction of network DVR, the introduction of addressable linear, and bringing that all together, I think Europe is actually doing a fairly good job in comparison with the US.
And directly with the broadcasters.
Right.
That's the other difference in the model. So in the US, it's primarily the MVPDs who have 2 minutes an hour. Whereas here, we are dealing directly with the broadcasters, and they often say to us, we say, oh, wow, I wish we get to your revenue position, but they say, well, we want to crack the model that you've cracked.
Let's jump on, I'm sensitive to time, and talk a little bit about the technology challenges. So obviously, broadcasters across Europe are pretty advanced in deploying advanced advertising tech around their OTT products. The TV platforms are a little bit more complicated. Why don't we start and just get a sense from each of the panel of just how complicated this stuff is? What makes it so hard to deploy these kinds of solutions on cable networks and satellite platforms and so on and so forth?
I mean, from where I'm standing, it's the number of touch points that a piece of content goes through, from creation through to arriving on the TV. And so aligning all of the various broadcasters on their various broadcast formats and ensuring that signaling is consistent and metadata is consistent, that user data or audience data is consistent, that achieving consistency across all the partners that are involved is a lot of balls to juggle.
JP, what's
For us,
the hard thing?
it's disparity of in-home technology. So, we're in a lot of different countries. We have a lot of different set-top boxes. We have, OTT platforms. And so I think what that means, though, it's like, okay, yeah, you have a lot of different challenges, but what that means is it shapes where you invest. Right? And what countries you focus on.
I think a lot of it is the commercial structure. So it's the fact that we have separate broadcasters to operators. They need to talk. They need to agree a deal. We have broadcasters speaking to agencies, and really the agencies need to provide them with an incentive, as in additional spend. But I'd say all of this could be overcome if only the broadcasters were more willing to embrace little steps, which they are beginning to do. And that little step might be enabling dynamic ad insertion over their OTT linear stream, and it might be working with ad tech partners that can actually tap into programmatic demand, and that is starting to happen. We're working with a few broadcasters in that respect, but there is a general reticence to even take those little steps.
So it's kind of a culture of gradualism we need, rather than looking for the one big bang that unlocks the whole thing in one go.
I mean, that's often when I'm in talking to broadcasters about the things we could do, they view us as a company that is who they want to work with in 5 years' time, and that really frustrates me.
Right.
Because I want to say, look, there's things we can do in 6 months' time, honest.
You've got targets to hit this year. 5 years is no good. Ashwin?
I maybe have a slightly different view. I know this thing, we all want this to happen faster as an industry, but I think across Europe we see a fairly mature view on getting the plant and equipment, to JP's point, ready, getting the inventory management systems and the inventory available. I see a big gap in data management, in making data available for for describing the audience, and then allowing very granular segmentation of the audience against purchase behaviors or very narrow demographic behavior or demographic segments. And then ultimately that allows for attribution, as well. And I think that's going to be both a big challenge today, but a huge opportunity as well.
And it's usually about this point that somebody says GDPR, and we will wave our uncertainty flags.
Let's not mention GDPR.
Let's not.
No, so yeah, I think that raises an interesting point. But what I think as you hear all the way down the chain, there's a desire to use the advertising or the data. There's, but there is an issue I think with the last mile in advanced advertising that prohibits scale and also fragments the market. And it's not just fragmented; it's fragmented from distributor to distributor, to telco to MVPD, to country. But what we're starting to see signs of in the U.S., which I think will filter out to the rest of the industry, is we've seen two major players recently indicate that they're going to ditch IPTV infrastructure and go directly to where they can, where the broadband supports it, directly to OTT. So they're going to ditch IPTV or they're going to ditch satellite-based infrastructure. AT&T just talked about it this week, saying that they were going to go all to OTT for their backbone and their delivery. I mean, even here at the show, you see guys like Aris rolling out Android set-top boxes. It allows us to evolve the user experience through software, and then it allows the insertion and personalization of the advertising in streams like HLS and Dash and other technologies that then it becomes much easier to evolve that experience moving forward. And I think, based on a lot of feedback we've heard, there's a lot of people planning their next generation technology, maybe not being as proprietary as their current generation technology, because standards have evolved to a point where we can get consensus about what we think is open and flexible moving forward, right?
And that could shift the market very fast. I had one very quick question, which I fear I'm going to address at you, JP. If there was one practical thing the broadcast and TV platforms could do together to unlock the potential of this market, what would it be? What practical step can you take with your distribution partners, sorry, your broadcast partners, to make this more of a reality on some platforms?
Well, the biggest one is just getting it done. I mean, signing a deal, and it's there's every bit of flexibility in what inventory is used, but actually just getting broadcasters on board and utilizing this is really the first step. And then I think that, as Ashwin said, the data piece is critical, because broadcasters don't. It's not in their DNA.
Is there a commercial terms problem? Who's taking how much of the?
I don't think so. Okay. I mean, we did in the beginning. We thought, we're going to show up like another ad tech company and say, can we have our piece of the pie? But I think this is treated largely like repping deals, and they're used to that. So and it's accretive, it's incremental. I mean, if Jamie West were here, he would say 70% or over 70% of all of their clients are new to TV, and that's quite an amazing thing. So if we can just get the bloody thing cracking,
we can supercharge this medium and grow.
Yeah, and then we can start to look at these existential questions around threats from Google and Facebook and how we actually position. Because at the end of the day, with all this stuff, it's what is TV, right?
Final closing question, because we're basically out of time. It's the future bit. So given everything you've heard, 5 years out, what's going to look most different in the TV advertising market? We're going to have to be super fast. Should we start with you, Les, and just work our way down?
Sure. I think it's going to become more measurable and more interactive, for sure.
Right.
Agree. And I think that from a yield management standpoint, we'll see, hopefully, the digital and the television worlds coming together.
In 2019, Netflix are going to announce a freemium model. And this and other the triggers that we've been discussing will cause most of the broadcasters to adopt some sort of coalition of the willing, where there will be a lot of coalitions between multiple broadcasters and multiple operators and ad tech companies that will start to kick in by about 2020, 2021.
That feels like a wonderfully smart prediction, specific, measurable.
It's like Admira in Switzerland. That's exactly what they do.
I think we're going to see TV, we're going to stop thinking about TV as a singular screen. We're going to be thinking about it as a format and a variety of platforms that are available to consume that format. And we're going to have a lot more advertisers in the market by that point in time. And I think pricing will go up because we're going to have a variety of different pricing models that ultimately drive yield significantly higher.
Yeah, pricing goes up. ad load goes down. And then I would echo everything that they would say, but I would add on here that my hope would be that at that point, the buy-side tools have got it figured out so that the agencies and brands can adequately plan and measure audiences across what we would consider to be TV, which is going to be this amazing video content everywhere on all devices, on all these distribution points, but it's going to roll up into something that is really actionable on the advertising side so that they can start shifting budgets away from these black boxes and these walled gardens and back to where it belongs.
That, to me, sounds like a fantastic, exciting future. Gentlemen, thank you so much. We're done on time. We're going to have to zip through the questions and hand over to our next panel. Stick around if you want to hear what blockchain looks like in the media market. I guarantee you'll know by the end of the next 45 minutes. Thank you to our panel.